Hi, I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation and welcome to the Hive. In this video, we'll be taking a look at this open source HA Switchplate. It's a touchscreen controller for Home Assistant that mounts in a wall. Now this video will just be an overview of the HA Switchplate, and there will be a separate video about the build process for HA Switchplate. What we will discuss is the cost to build it. We'll take a look at some of its functions and we'll show you how to get it set up in our demo instance of Home Assistant here. So while I roll the intro, take a moment to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when I release new videos each week. And let's get started. So this HA Switchplate, or HASPone, is an open source DIY touchscreen based around an ESP8266 development board called a Wemos D1 Mini. The Wemos D1 Mini is similar to the Node MCU that we saw in a previous video. Now, being an open source DIY project, it does take some work to get it built and working, which we'll touch more on in the upcoming build log video. I'll also put a link to the GitHub repository in the description if you want to take a look at one of these for yourself. HASPone is designed to mount in a standard North American switch box, kind of like a light switch, and it can be used to trigger scenes, automations, and entities in your Home Assistant instance. And because it uses MQTT to do so, you could theoretically then use it with other home automation orchestration products too. Now, I've got some of the components involved in the build for the HA Switchplate here on the table. So here's obviously the finished unit. This is a assembled board without the Wemos D1 Mini attached. We've got the printed circuit board. There's also, I've got two different examples of the power supply. So there's the AC power supply here, and there's also a DC power supply. So if you wanted to just run this off a 12-volt wall wart, you could use something like this, and this is obviously much smaller than the big AC power supply that you see attached here. So this unit that I have here, the built one, is mains powered, and as I mentioned, there is the option to build a DC powered one using this smaller power supply module. The DC powered unit works great in a desktop mounted enclosure, shallower box than this one here, rather than the wall mounted context of the original design. Cost wise, these materials that you see on the table here cost around $55 Australian, and I'll put a bill of materials up on screen as well to show you roughly what each item costs. Obviously things like transistors and resistors are pretty cheap, but some of the cost starts to add up when we add the power supplies, etc. Those parts don't include the 3D printed enclosures, of course, and those STL files are included in the GitHub repo, but you will need to account for material costs and print time there as well. But with 3D printing, the cost of materials is generally fairly negligible per unit. Assembly time is another factor to consider here. And to solder all of the components to the board takes maybe 20 or 30 minutes per board, but there are some modifications that often are made to the display as well that take some time and patience, and let me tell you, they're not for the faint-hearted, especially with the display board being the most expensive component of the build. At roughly $55 and 20 to 30 minutes, these switch plates are hardly expensive. But if you were planning to put one in every single room, the cost would add up pretty quickly. Okay, now let's take a closer look at the functionality. I'm pretty impressed with how customizable these units are. You can set up several pages on each device for a variety of functions, like this information display, which shows today's date, the current time, the outside temperature, and the outside weather conditions. For demonstration purposes, I've also set up some other screens. We've got a menu page with alarm, media and dimmers. We've got some dimmers, and we can actually click and scroll these dimmers and change the brightness of lights. It's not super responsive, and that's partly because of the ESP8266 module in here, but we can turn stuff on and off. I've also created this toggle page, so I can toggle various lights on and off as well. We also have an alarm control panel, so we could type in a passcode here and then arm or disarm the alarm. And there's a media control page, including a volume slider here as well. Fast forward, fast back, and play, pause buttons, which unfortunately at the moment I haven't yet been able to get working. There is also an HVAC page that you can set up with this unit for controlling thermostats, etc. But I won't go into that in this video. One thing I will say is that it can appear to be very laggy from time to time, and I've found that a little bit frustrating. But as I mentioned before, I suspect that that may be to do with the ESP8266 that's inside not exactly winning any awards for processing power. There is a similar open source project that I will be exploring in a future video, which can be used on the more powerful ESP32 or on the same ESP8266. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out when I do that review. So now that I've covered off the cost and a brief overview, let's take a look at how to set one of these up. I've filmed a build log of this unit already to cover off the process of putting the unit together, and that video will be coming out soon, so if you're not subscribed, do so now. So the first thing to do is to get the HASPone firmware onto our D1 Mini. So to do that, we're going to use our old faithful Tasmatizer. So I'm going to open up a terminal and I'm going to run tasmatizer.py and bring up Tasmatizer. We've got our TTY USB serial, which is our D1 Mini. It is a self-resetting device. It's a WeMOS, and I don't need to save the original firmware because this is a dev board, but I'm going to select bin file and I'm going to click open here. And you'll see I'm already in the Arduino sketch folder underneath the GitHub repository, and I'm going to select the HA Switchplate D1 Mini bin. I'll hit open and Tasmatize. And this is going to take a couple of moments to flash the D1 Mini, and then we will be able to set up our Wi-Fi. Okay, great. So that's telling us that the process is successful. So I will hit OK and we'll quit out of Tasmatizer and we'll close our terminal window. Right, so that has now flashed, and I'm going to have to pause the video there and we'll plug this WeMOS D1 Mini into the control board that's inside here, and we'll be back in a second to set the unit up. Okay, so we've installed the D1 Mini into the main board and I'll power it up. And we can see HASP initializing, and we can now start setting it up. So you'll see on screen that we have a QR code and we've got an access point ID and a password for that. So HA Switchplate is the access point and password is HASPone. And there is an IP address there that we can take a look at as well. So very similar to when we put Tasmota on our devices. If I click on our Wi-Fi here, click on other networks, and we'll click on HA Switchplate, and HASPone is our password. And I'm just going to untick remember this network, just so that if I set up another one of these in the future and for whatever reason the password has changed, I'm not going to run into any trouble there. So I'm going to join that network, and because I'm on a Mac, we're going to get a captive portal in a moment. But if you didn't get a captive portal, you could navigate to the IP address that's displayed down here. So we've got Wi-Fi manager and we've got info and exit. If we take a look at info, we can see things like the uptime, the CPU frequency, the memory available, etc. And we can take a look at erasing things like Wi-Fi config. I'm just going to hit back down here and we'll go to configure Wi-Fi, and we're going to use the force, and I'll type in the password, and we'll call this one plate 2, and that's because I already have plate 1 in play, and I don't want to mess that up. We need to type in the details of our MQTT broker, so 192.168.120 is mine here, and we can leave the user and password disabled, and we'll leave TLS disabled as well. We can also configure admin access. I'm going to leave that as is for now, and I'm going to click save, and it's going to try to save the credentials, and over on the device it's going to then reboot, and we can see that we have it connected to the force on the IP address 192.168.1.193, and MQTT is connected on 192.168.120. So if we head back to a browser and go to 192.168.1.193, we can browse to there and we can see the settings of our HA Switchplate, and you can see that there's a HASP update available, so we can update to version 1.02. There's update firmware, reboot device, reset the LCD backlight, reset factory settings, etc. in here. Let's just quickly update to 1.02, and that's going to take a moment, and you can see that on screen as it updates. It's obviously ill-advised to power this unit down while it's doing an update. So once that's done, we'll come back and then we will start making it actually useful. Okay, fantastic. So the firmware has updated, and if I go back to the main page, we can see that it's not saying that there's an update yet. There's some interesting settings here, things like a motion sensor pin, so you can actually have this set up so that it wakes up when it detects motion near the switch plate. And you can also add a beeper on the pin D2 and some other things here as well. So we won't go too much into detail here. We've got everything set up so we can close this window. Now we actually need to put something on it. And so what we'll do, we're taking a look here at the GitHub page now for HA Switchplate, or HASPone. And what we want to do is go into the Home Assistant blueprints folder here, and you can see all of these different blueprint YAML files. If we move down, there's some stuff that we can do here. So we need core functionality to even get started. So what I'm going to do is actually take the easy way out for setting this up, and I'm going to use the My Home Assistant integration. And this is a bit of a pro tip here. If you set up My Home Assistant integration with your browser, it's a lot easier to import blueprints from projects such as this one. So if we import the blueprint, if you've never used My Home Assistant before, you'll get presented with this page where you can enter the details of your Home Assistant URL, and it's only stored in your browser. So I'm just going to put in the details of my demo instance here, and I'm going to click Update, and it's going to ask me if I want to open this page in my Home Assistant. I'm going to open the link, and it's telling me import the blueprint. We'll hit preview, and I'll import this blueprint. So now that we've got this HASP core functionality blueprint in here, I can click create automation. I'm going to change the name and call it HA Switchplate, and that's just so that I can keep everything organized. I'll make that all caps, and core functionality is fine. And blueprint to use, there's that, version 1.02. HASP page and button references. This is quite useful. So this HASP page and button references, this is super useful for when you are setting up your different buttons, etc. on your HASPone. And there's also some font references here as well, which is a little bit helpful as well. So for our HASP device, I'm going to select plate 2 because that's what I called this one. For the page select button 1 text, I'm going to change that to previous, and I'm going to put a less than there. I'm going to leave page 2 and I'm going to put page 3 as next, and then a greater than symbol, and you'll see why in a second. And I'm going to set this to enable page scrolling instead of page select. So by default we get 3 buttons at the bottom, and by setting it up like this, so previous and next, and then turning this toggle to on, we're going to get a previous, the name, and a next button there. So then we can change things in our page scroll list, so we can exclude pages from our page scroll, and we can change our page names. So for this I can put info, and if I wanted to on page 2 I could put pages, and then on page 3 I could put test, and so on and so forth down the line. Now the first time we set this unit up, we can turn on this toggle here. So it says first time HASP setup or reset. Turn this on if this is a brand new HASP or you'd like to reset default theme settings. Turn it on, hit save, and click run actions to set up your HASP. And then after you've set it up, we can turn that back off. We've also got this Lovelace configuration notification. Turn this on to have a ready-made entities card configuration presented when you click run actions. Toggle this back off once you've added the code to your dashboard. So I'm going to save these changes here, and once that's saved, I'm going to run actions, and we should see setting up Home Assistant. The unit's going to reboot, and we've now got a blank page with previous, test, and next on the screen. So if I hit previous, we'll scroll back to pages, and previous again, and we'll get page 1, which we've set absolutely nothing up on. So I will toggle off this first time HASP setup or reset, and I'll toggle off this here, and we'll click save. So now that we've done that, if we pop over to our overview in Home Assistant, and we can scroll through, and we have some information about our plate. So we've got plate 1 active page and plate 2 active page. I'm going to scroll through here, and as we scroll through on this plate 2 active page, you'll start seeing the page actually change. So we're on page 3, which is test, page 2, which is pages, page 2, which is test apparently, and page 1, which is pages, and so on and so forth. So now that we've got the basic setup done, what we're going to actually do is I'll set up an information display exactly as we saw with the demo at the beginning of the video. So we'll need to import a few blueprints, and we'll go through the different ones that we need for this. So one that we don't necessarily need is activate page on idle. I like to use this so that it goes back to the start whenever it's inactive for a while. So I'll import that one, and I'll open that link in a new tab, and we'll preview and import, and that's going to give me this blueprint here. We'll create the automation. We will select plate 2, page to activate is page 1, and we can set our idle time here. We'll hit save, and we'll run the action, and that's going to send that command over to our HA Switchplate. We won't worry about activate page. We won't worry too much about device triggers just yet. Device triggers can be utilized when creating your own automations through the Home Assistant UI. Display alarm control on page 7. We don't need that right now, but it is a nice to have. So if you wanted to set up the alarm panel on this unit, you could do so and import that blueprint and set it up. Now what I do want for my setup is display the calendar with the icon. So I'm going to open that in a new page. I want display a clock with an icon. I'm going to open that in a new page. And I want to scroll further down. I don't want a dimmer right now. I don't want the clock without the icon. I like the icon. Entity, state, or attribute. I don't need that right now either. Display media controls on page 8. Again, nice to have, not something that I'm going to use for this demo. Display temperature with icon and colors. I'm going to grab that. So I'm going to import that in a new page. And we've also got display template. So a button will display the output of a template. So using the templating engine that we've covered in a couple of previous videos, HA Switchplate to display some of those details. We've got display text, so literally just some text on one of the buttons. Display toggle, display volume control on page 8, display weather condition with icon. Now this is what I want. I want to import this one in a new tab. There's weather forecast, perform an action, remove MQTT discovery devices, and that will remove discovery messages for a decommissioned HA Switchplate. HASP theme dark on light, and HASP theme light on dark. So I'm going to import light on dark and dark on light so that you can see the difference between those two. So let me just import these. Okay, so I've imported all of those blueprints and now we're on our configuration blueprints page in Home Assistant. And I'm in kiosk mode here just to make everything a little bit clearer. So we've already run our core functionality. We don't need to worry about that. What we do want to do is display a clock with a clock icon. So I'm going to create an automation and we're going to plate 2. Again, that's what we've got here. I'm going to HASP page. I'm going to page 1 and the HASP button that we want. Now, if we expand our page and button reference here, we can only display this particular button on pages 1 through 3. We're on page 1 and we can change that slider to page 2 or page 3 if we wanted to, but I'm going to go to page 1 and I want that in this second position, which if we take a look at this reference is button 5. So I'm going to move that to button 5. And we can change this to either a 24-hour or a 12-hour display. I prefer a 24-hour display, and we will click save. And if I scroll up and run actions, we should have a clock appear on our HA Switchplate. Again, if we go back to our blueprints, the next thing that I want is I want a month and date with a calendar icon. So we'll create the automation and we will select plate 2. And again, looking at our reference, we can only do this on pages 1 through 3. We're on page 1. I want it on the top, so I'm going to leave that as HASP button number 4. I'll hit save and run actions. And we should have today's date pop up on screen. Okay, and we'll go back to blueprints. Next thing I want is the current temperature with the icon and colors. So I'm going to create the automation next to that blueprint, going to plate 2. Now again, we are limited to which pages we can do this on. We've got 1, 2, or 3, and I want this underneath the time. So looking at our button reference, I want this in B6. So 6 button. And the weather provider in the drop down, I'm going to choose our Hive demo here, so our weather provider is Hive demo, and in the temperature sensor, we need to choose a temperature sensor to display. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my outside, I think I've got one here. outside temperature, here we go. So we've got dark sky temperature. So we've got whether we want to use the state or attribute to monitor, we can just leave that as state, and we can change the temperature display suffix. So we've got either degrees F or degrees C. We're going for degrees C because we're in Australia and we don't use Fahrenheit here. And this is to do with some different colors that we can display here. So if we take a look at the Nextion color code, we can expand that out and use some information here to decide what colors we want. I'm going to leave everything as the defaults, and I'm also going to colorize the temperature text here. It's also saying round sensor values to nearest integer. I might turn that off and see what that looks like if it's going to display decimal points. So I'll save that automation and I will run the actions there. And we should have our temperature show up here. Yes, we do. 9.2 degrees C, and the text is blue because it is below a threshold here. Fantastic. Last thing that I want to add to our information display is our current weather condition with icons. So we'll go to create automation, and HASP device is plate 2, HASP page 1, and again, looking at our reference, I want this in the last position on here. So I'm going to scroll through to button 7. Our weather provider is going to be, we'll go dark sky, and we'll go save, and I'm going to run actions, and we should have any second now. Yep. So we've got our icon come up, and in a moment we should get the text as well. I'm just going to run the actions again so that we get the text. Yep. So we just need, sometimes we need to run the actions more than once. So it's partly cloudy outside, which is all good, and 9.2 degrees. Okay, so that is the dark on light settings. Let's go to back to our blueprints, and we'll go light on dark, and I'll create this automation. We'll change our HASP device to plate 2. Very simple setup for this one, and I will run the actions, and we then get everything should switch to light on dark. There we go. So we've now got light text on a dark background, and we can change that back using the dark on light blueprint, which I will set up and run now. So now we've got an info display with today's date, the time, the temperature outside based on our weather integration sensor, and the weather conditions from that same integration sensor. There's a whole bunch more that you can set up on these units. Like I mentioned before, there's dimmer pages, media pages, alarm control panels, and more. So that's the HASPone Switchplate controller. As you can see, it's pretty involved to get it set up in the way you want, but it's a very cool project, and I think it's definitely worth the effort. The thing I love most about this is this information display that I've set up right here. I tend to have this unit sitting on my desk when I'm working from home, and I can take a quick glance and see the date and time without too much effort. And if I feel the need to turn off some lights, I can do it all from here as well. That's all we have for this video. I do hope that it helped you in your home automation journey. Be sure to comment down below with a home automation idea or DIY project that you'd like to see me cover in a future video. And let me know how you would use one of these HASPone devices in your smart home. Don't forget to follow HiveMind Automation on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Those links are in the video description down below. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up button to give it a like. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing now. While you're at it, please hit the bell icon so that you get notified when I release new videos each week. Lastly, if you enjoy what I'm doing here and you want to help to support the channel, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description down below. Contributions made through Buy Me a Coffee are put towards making more and better content for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.